The applause thundered around me as Marcus stepped onto the stage at the Riverside Community Center, my golden retriever Bailey trotting beside him on a bright red leash I'd never seen before. 300 people filled the auditorium for the annual Heroes Among Us Awards ceremony, and my husband was being honored for his volunteer work at the local animal shelter. The irony tasted like copper pennies in my mouth. Ladies and gentlemen, the announcer's voice boomed through the speakers. Please welcome Marcus Wellington, this year's Volunteer of the Year, along with his rescue dog Bailey, who he saved from euthanasia just 6 months ago. I sat in the third row, my hands folded perfectly in my lap, wearing the navy dress Marcus had bought me for our anniversary last year. The same anniversary where he'd promised we'd get a dog together someday. The same anniversary where he'd held me close and whispered that he loved how patient I was, how I never rushed into anything important. My phone buzzed against my thigh. A text from my lawyer. Everything is ready. Just say the word. I watched Marcus accept his crystal trophy, watched him lean into the microphone with that boyish grin that had made me fall in love with him 8 years ago. Bailey sat perfectly beside him, tail wagging, completely unaware that she was about to become the centerpiece of the most public humiliation Marcus would ever experience. "You know," Marcus said, his voice carrying that practiced charm he used during his real estate presentations. "When I first walked into Paws and Hearts Animal Shelter 6 months ago, I never expected to find my best friend. But there she was, this beautiful golden girl scheduled to be put down the next day because no one wanted her." The crowd made sympathetic sounds. Someone behind me whispered, "That's so beautiful." Marcus scratched Bailey behind the ears. The staff told me she'd been surrendered by her previous owners because of a divorce. Can you imagine? Throwing away something so precious just because life gets a little complicated? The universe had a sense of humor. I'd give it that. I smiled and clapped when everyone else did, my wedding ring catching the stage lights. In exactly 47 minutes, Marcus would discover that the divorce papers I'd filed 3 weeks ago weren't the only surprise waiting for him. In 47 minutes, he'd learned that a woman he'd been cheating with for the past 4 months wasn't the only one who'd been keeping secrets. But for now, I sat there, looking like the perfect supportive wife, thinking about the phone call I'd received from Paws and Hearts Animal Shelter exactly 2 months ago. "Mrs. Wellington, this is Amanda from Paws and Hearts. I'm calling because Bailey's microchip is registered under your name, and we wanted to confirm that you intended to surrender her for adoption. Your husband brought her in yesterday, but our system shows you as the primary owner, and we always like to double-check when there might be a family situation involved." That was the moment I knew for certain that Marcus wasn't just cheating on me with Vanessa from his office. He was planning to leave me entirely, and he was taking my dog to do it. The thing about being a forensic accountant is that you learn to follow paper trails, to piece together stories from numbers and dates and tiny inconsistencies that most people miss. The thing about being married to a real estate agent is that you learn to spot when someone is staging a scene, making something look more appealing than it really is. The thing about being both is that when your husband starts moving money around and lying about where he spends his evenings, you notice everything. Marcus finished his speech to another round of applause. As he walked off stage, Bailey looked back toward the audience, and for a moment, our eyes met. I swear she recognized me. I swear she knew I was coming for her. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was a number I didn't recognize, but I knew exactly who it was. "Enjoy the show tonight. Can't wait to celebrate with my hero later." Vanessa had been texting Marcus all evening. I knew because I'd been reading every message for the past 6 weeks, ever since I'd figured out his phone passcode was Bailey's birthday. The same birthday he pretended to forget last month, when I tried to plan a little party for our dog. Our dog. Not his dog. Our dog, who was registered in my name, whose vet bills I'd paid, whose food I'd bought, whose heart I'd won by being the one who actually came home every night to walk her and feed her and tell her she was a good girl. The ceremony continued around me, but I was no longer watching. Instead, I was thinking about the conversation I'd had with my lawyer yesterday afternoon. The beauty of it, she'd explained, is that everything he's done is perfectly legal until the moment the judge signs the final divorce decree. But the moment that happens, taking Bailey becomes theft of property. And since he's been publicly claiming to have rescued her, well, that becomes fraud. Plus, there's the matter of him forging your signature on the surrender paperwork. I'd asked her how she could be so sure he'd forged my signature. She'd smiled. Because I've been your lawyer for 3 years, and I know you would never surrender Bailey. Plus, I had a handwriting expert look at the forms Amanda from the shelter faxed over. Amateur work, really. Marcus should have practiced more. The applause died down as the next award was announced. Marcus made his way back to his seat 2 rows behind me, Bailey still at his side. He texted me earlier saying he had to work late and wouldn't be able to make it to the ceremony, apologizing profusely and promising to make it up to me this weekend. This weekend, when he'd planned to finally tell me he was leaving? This weekend, when he'd expected to move in with Vanessa and her downtown loft, bringing Bailey as a sort of furry peace offering to help his new girlfriend forgive him for being married this whole time. This weekend, when he'd thought I'd be crying into a box of tissues, blindsided and broken by his sudden departure. Instead, this weekend, I'd be picking up Bailey from the emergency boarding facility where she'd be staying temporarily, and Marcus would be explaining to a judge why he'd committed multiple felonies in pursuit of what he thought was a clean exit from our marriage. But tonight, I just sat there, listening to him whisper to the woman beside him, not Vanessa, but his mother, who'd flown in specifically for this ceremony without telling me she was coming. Another lie in an increasingly complex web. I'm so proud of you, honey, she whispered back. Vanessa is going to love Bailey. Such a sweet way to start your new life together. My hands remained folded in my lap. My smile stayed perfectly in place, and I mentally added conspiracy to the list of charges I was considering. The thing about revenge is that it's only satisfying if the person who wronged you understands exactly how they brought it on themselves. Random cruelty is just violence, but calculated justice? That's poetry. And I'd been writing this poem for weeks. The reception after the ceremony was held in the community center's main hall, with round tables covered in white tablecloths and centerpieces of wildflowers. I'd helped plan this event 6 months ago, back when I thought Marcus and I would be attending together as a happily married couple. Back when I still believed his late nights were really about preparing for difficult sales presentations. I moved through the crowd with practiced ease, accepting congratulations on Marcus's behalf, smiling when people told me how lucky I was to have such a dedicated husband. The whole time, I kept one eye on Bailey, who was working the room like a professional therapy dog, accepting pets and treats from admirers. She's absolutely gorgeous, said Helena Price, president of the local historical society and one of my regular clients. Marcus told us she was quite sick when he found her. You must be so grateful he saved her. Oh, I am, I replied, sipping my white wine. Marcus has always been wonderful with animals. He has such a gift for taking care of things that belong to other people. Helena nodded enthusiastically, completely missing the edge in my voice. And the timing was perfect, wasn't it? Right when you were talking about wanting a dog? I paused, my wine glass halfway to my lips. I'm sorry? Last spring at the charity auction, you mentioned to my daughter that you'd been wanting to adopt a dog for years, but Marcus always said you weren't ready. Said he wanted to wait until you had a bigger yard or something. The memory hit me like cold water. I had said that, frustrated after another conversation where Marcus had dismissed my desire to adopt a pet. He'd had a dozen reasons why it wasn't the right time, but I'd suspected the real reason was that he simply didn't want the responsibility. Right, I said carefully. The timing did work out perfectly. Helena beamed. It's like fate, isn't it? Sometimes the universe knows exactly what we need, even when we don't realize it ourselves. I excused myself and walked toward the restroom, needing a moment to process this new information. In the mirror, I looked exactly like what I was supposed to be. A proud wife in a tasteful dress, makeup still perfect after 3 hours, every hair in place. I looked like someone whose biggest concern was whether the wine stain on table 7 would come out of the white tablecloth. I did not look like someone who'd spent the afternoon transferring her husband's half of their joint savings account into her own name, legally and with proper documentation, using a power of attorney he'd signed 2 years ago when he was in the hospital with pneumonia. I did not look like someone who'd already changed the locks on their house. I did not look like someone who'd been sleeping in the guest room for 3 weeks, not because of any fight, but because I couldn't stand sharing a bed with someone who was lying to me every single night. The bathroom door opened and Vanessa walked in. I'd seen pictures of her, of course. Social media made stalking remarkably easy, especially when someone was careless about their privacy settings. But seeing her in person was different. She was younger than me by about 5 years, with the kind of artfully messy blonde hair that cost more than most people's rent. She wore a black cocktail dress that probably cost more than my car payment, and she moved with the confidence of someone who'd never had to wonder whether she was pretty enough, smart enough, or interesting enough. She was also visibly pregnant. That was new information. "Oh," she said, stopping short when she saw me. "You're Marcus's wife." "I am," I said pleasantly. "And you're Vanessa." Her face went through several expressions in rapid succession: surprise, guilt, defiance, and finally settling on something that might have been resignation. "Look," she said, moving to the sink next to mine. "I know this is awkward, but Marcus is going to tell you everything this weekend. We didn't plan for it to happen this way." I watched her in the mirror as she reapplied her lipstick. Her hands were shaking slightly. "How far along are you?" I asked. She met my eyes in the reflection. 4 months. 4 months. That meant she'd gotten pregnant in June, right around the time Marcus had started working late more often. Right around the time he'd suddenly become interested in volunteering at the animal shelter. "Congratulations," I said, and meant it. "When are you due?" "February," she said cautiously, clearly not sure what game we were playing. "A Valentine's baby. How romantic." She laughed, a short, nervous sound. Not exactly the timing we would have chosen, but yeah. Marcus is excited about being a father. Marcus, who'd told me for 3 years that he wasn't ready for children. Marcus, who'd said we should wait until we were more financially stable, until we'd traveled more, until we'd figured out our 5-year plan. Marcus, who'd apparently figured out his 5-year plan just fine. It just didn't include me. "I'm sure he is," I said. "He's always been good at taking care of new things." Vanessa studied my face in the mirror. "You're taking this really well." "Am I? I mean, if I found out my husband was cheating on me, I'd probably be screaming by now, or crying, or both." I snarled. "Who says I just found out?" That got her attention. She turned to face me directly, abandoning any pretense of checking her makeup. "What do you mean?" "I mean, Vanessa, that I've known about you since the beginning of July. I know about the pregnancy. I know about the apartment downtown. I know about the weekend trips to Napa that Marcus told me were real estate conferences. I know that you think he's divorced already. And I know that you've been helping him plan his exit strategy from our marriage." Her face went pale beneath her expertly applied foundation. "The question is," I continue, "how much do you know about Marcus's exit strategy from you?" "What are you talking about?" I pulled out my phone and showed her a screenshot of a text conversation. Marcus's name was at the top, but the messages weren't to me. "Can't wait for this whole thing to be over. Stephanie still doesn't suspect anything, and once the divorce is final, I'll be free to figure out what I really want. The baby complicates things, but we'll work it out. Maybe it's time for both of us to start fresh. Trust me, by March, everything will be different." Vanessa read the messages twice, her face getting paler with each word. "Who was he texting?" she asked. "Her name is Brooke. She's a yoga instructor from Portland. They met on a business trip last month. The silence stretched between us like a taut wire. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear the reception continuing laughter, clinking glasses, the low hum of conversation. "You're lying," Vanessa said finally. "Am I?" I turned my phone so she could see the contact information clearly. "Feel free to call her. I'm sure she'd love to chat about Marcus's plans for your future together." Vanessa stared at the phone, then at me, then back at the phone. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because," I said, tucking my phone back into my purse, "I believe in informed consent. Marcus has been lying to both of us, but at least I went into this marriage with accurate information. You deserve the same courtesy before you make any major life decisions. But you could have you could have confronted him privately. Why tell me at all?" I met her eyes in the mirror one last time before heading toward the door. "Because, Vanessa, the best revenge isn't hurting the person who wronged you. It's making sure they hurt themselves." I left her standing there, staring at her reflection, one hand unconsciously resting on her barely visible bump. When I returned to the reception, Marcus was holding court at our table, Bailey lying contentedly at his feet while he regaled a group of admirers with stories about his volunteer work. He looked up as I approached, his face lighting up with that practiced smile. "There's my beautiful wife," he said, standing to pull out my chair. "I was just telling everyone about the amazing work the shelter does. You should really come volunteer with me sometime, honey. I think you'd love it." "I'd love that," I said, settling into my seat. I've always been interested in animal rescue, especially helping animals that have been abandoned by people who were supposed to protect them. Marcus's smile flickered for just a moment, but he recovered quickly. "Well, maybe we can go together next week. I'm sure they could use your organizational skills." "Actually," I said, "I was thinking we might not have time for that." "Oh, why not?" I pulled an envelope from my purse and placed it on the table between us. His name was written across the front in my careful handwriting. "Because you're going to be very busy with legal proceedings." Marcus stared at the envelope like it might bite him. Around our table, the conversation had stopped. People were pretending not to listen. But I could feel their attention, like heat from a fire. "What's this?" he asked. "Divorce papers," I said pleasantly. "Filed 3 weeks ago, along with several other documents you might find interesting." His face went through the same progression of emotions I'd just watched Vanessa experience. Surprise, guilt, defiance, resignation. But with Marcus, there was something else. Something that looked like calculation. "Honey," he said carefully, "maybe we should discuss this privately." "Oh, I think we're past privacy, don't you?" I gestured around the room. "After all, you've made Bailey such a public part of your story. It seems only fair that everyone knows the whole truth." Marcus's hand moved instinctively toward Bailey's leash, and I saw the exact moment when he realized what I was really saying. "You can't," he said quietly. "Can't what?" "Bailey is my dog. I rescued her. Everyone here saw you accept an award for rescuing a dog that was already mine," I said. "A dog you stole from me after forging my signature on surrender papers. A dog whose microchip is registered in my name, whose veterinary records list me as the owner, whose adoption fee I can prove I paid with my own credit card 2 years ago." The color drained from Marcus's face. Around us, I could hear the whispers starting, the way news spreads through a crowd like ripples in water. "That's impossible," he said. "Bailey was a rescue from the shelter. I have the paperwork." "You have fraudulent paperwork," I corrected. "Paperwork you created by surrendering my dog under false pretenses and then immediately adopting her back out to yourself. Very clever, actually. If I hadn't been paying attention, you might have gotten away with it." Marcus looked around the table, searching for support, for someone to tell him this was all a misunderstanding. But the faces staring back at him were confused, concerned, and increasingly disapproving. "The thing is, Marcus," I continued, "Bailey was never the real prize, was she? She was just a prop in your larger story. The devoted husband who saves abandoned animals. the responsible man ready to start fresh with a new family. The hero who rescues the helpless. I stood up, smoothing my dress, and extended my hand toward Bailey. Without hesitation, she got up and came to my side, tail wagging. But Bailey was never helpless, I said, and neither was I. Martis reached for the leash, but I was faster. Bailey stayed close to my leg, looking up at me with the same trust and love she'd always shown. The same trust and love Marcus had tried to steal along with everything else. "You can't just take her," Marcus said, his voice rising. "This is kidnapping. This is theft." "Actually," said a voice from behind me, "this is justice." I turned to see Detective Morrison approaching our table, badge visible on his belt. He was Helena Price's son-in-law, and I'd worked with him on several fraud cases over the years. "Mrs. Wellington," he said formally, "I believe you called about some stolen property?" I handed him a folder I'd been carrying in my purse. "All the documentation is here. Original adoption papers, veterinary records, microchip registration, and the forged surrender documents." Detective Morrison flipped through the papers quickly, then looked at Marcus. "Sir, I'm going to need you to come with me to answer some questions about fraudulent documents and theft of property." "This is insane," Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Stephanie, we can work this out. We don't need to involve the police." "Oh, we're past working things out," I said. "We were past that the moment you decided Bailey was just another asset to be divided in your carefully planned exit strategy." As Detective Morrison led Marcus away from the table, I heard someone behind me whisper, "Did you know any of this was happening?" I turned to see Helena Price staring at me with a mixture of admiration and concern. "Mrs. Price," I said, "the thing about being a forensic accountant is that you learn to follow the money. And the thing about money is that it always tells the truth, even when people don't." Bailey pressed against my leg, and I reached down to scratch behind her ears. She looked up at me with complete trust, completely unaware that she'd just been at the center of the most public divorce proceeding in Riverside's recent history. "Good girl," I whispered. "Let's go home." The drive home was surreal. Bailey sat in the passenger seat, her usual spot before Marcus had started taking her to work with him. Her head hanging out the slightly open window, ears flapping in the breeze. She seemed completely unbothered by the evening's drama, as if she'd always known she'd end up back where she belonged. I, on the other hand, felt like I was floating somewhere outside my body, watching someone else drive my car down familiar streets. The radio played soft jazz, the same station Marcus and I used to listen to during weekend drives to the farmer's market. Now it felt like a soundtrack to someone else's life. My phone rang through the car's Bluetooth system. "Amanda from the animal shelter. Mrs. Wellington, I just wanted to call and make sure everything went okay tonight. Detective Morrison contacted us about the fraudulent paperwork, and we wanted you to know that we'll be cooperating fully with the investigation." "Thank you, Amanda. I appreciate everything you've done. I have to ask, how long have you known? About Bailey being your dog, I mean." I turned onto Maple Street, past the coffee shop where Marcus and I had our first date, past the park, where we talked about buying our first house together. "I've known Bailey was my dog since the day I adopted her," I said. "What I didn't know was that Marcus was planning to steal her." "But you knew he was planning to leave?" I pulled into our driveway, Nye driveway now, and turned off the engine. The house looked exactly the same as it had this morning, white colonial with blue shutters, small front garden that I maintained myself. The porch swing where Bailey and I spent summer evenings while Marcus worked late. "Amanda, can I ask you something? When Marcus brought Bailey in to surrender her, did he seem upset? Sad about giving her up?" There was a pause. "Not really, no. He seemed more businesslike about it. He had all the paperwork ready. He knew exactly what he wanted to do. He even asked specifically about the adoption process, how long it usually took, whether the same person could adopt a dog they'd just surrendered. And that didn't strike you as odd?" "It did, actually. That's why I called you to confirm. In my experience, people who are genuinely heartbroken about giving up a pet don't usually have such detailed plans about the logistics." I thanked Amanda and hung up, then sat in the car for a moment, looking at my house. Our house. The house Marcus would never see again, thanks to the restraining order my lawyer had filed along with the divorce papers. Bailey whined softly, ready to get out and explore her territory, to make sure everything was exactly as she'd left it. "Come on, girl," I said, opening the car door. "Let's go home." Inside, the house felt different, lighter somehow. I'd spent weeks moving Marcus's belongings to the garage, carefully documenting everything for the divorce proceedings. His clothes, his books, his collection of vintage watches, his golf clubs, all packed away in labeled boxes, ready to be claimed once the legal proceedings were settled. The only traces of him left were the photos on the mantle, and I'd only kept those because Bailey appeared in most of them. 8 years of marriage, reduced to a handful of pictures featuring my dog. Bailey went straight to her food bowl, then to her favorite spot on the couch, then to the sliding glass door that led to the backyard. Her routine, interrupted for months, immediately resumed as if nothing had happened. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on the couch beside her, pulling out my phone to check the messages that had been accumulating all evening. 3 texts from my sister Kate. "OMG, did you really just publicly divorce Marcus at the awards ceremony?" Followed by, "Mom wants to know if she should cancel the Christmas reservation for 4. And finally, call me right now." 2 missed calls from my lawyer. 1 text from an unknown number. "This is Vanessa. We need to talk." And 17 missed calls from Marcus. I deleted the missed calls without listening to the voicemails, then texted Kate, "We'll call tomorrow. Everything's fine. Marcus won't be joining us for Christmas." My lawyer could wait until business hours. But Vanessa was interesting. I called the unknown number. "Thank you for calling me back," she said without preamble. "I've been thinking about what you said, about Marcus and this Brooke person. And I called her. I waited. You were right. They've been planning this for weeks. Marcus told her he was already divorced, told her the baby was just a complication he was dealing with. He told her he'd never really loved me, that I was just a rebound after his marriage ended. Vanessa's voice was steady, but I could hear the hurt underneath. "I'm sorry," I said, and meant it. "The thing is," she continued, "I really thought he loved me. I thought we were building something real together. I thought the pregnancy was a happy surprise that just moved up our timeline." I sipped my wine and looked out at the backyard, where Bailey was investigating the garden borders, making sure everything was exactly as she remembered. "Vanessa, can I ask you something? When did Marcus first tell you he was getting divorced?" "March," she said immediately. "He said you'd grown apart, that it was mutual, that you were both ready to move on." "March. 3 months before we'd even had our first real fight. 3 months before I'd noticed anything was wrong." "And when did you start sleeping together?" "April." Her voice was smaller now. "He said the divorce was already in progress, that you were just waiting for the paperwork to go through." I closed my eyes. April was when Marcus had started working late more often. April was when he'd suddenly become passionate about animal rescue work. April was when he'd started talking about wanting to make changes in his life, be more responsible, think about the future. "Vanessa, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Do you love him?" The question hung in the air for a long moment. "I thought I did," she said finally, "but I think I loved the version of him that he showed me, the guy who was brave enough to leave an unhappy marriage, who was excited about becoming a father, who rescued abandoned animals and won awards for his community service. And now I'm wondering how much of that was real." I opened my laptop and navigated to the folder where I'd been collecting evidence for the past 2 months. Bank statements, credit card records, phone bills, social media activity, a complete picture of Marcus's double life. "Vanessa, what would you say if I told you that Marcus has been planning to leave both of us?" I'd say I'm not surprised anymore. What if I told you that the baby isn't the complication he's trying to solve? You are. Silence. What if I told you that he's been moving money out of his business account into a private account that neither of us knows about? Money he's been saving for his new life with Brooke? I'd ask you to prove it. I smiled. Check your email. I sent her a file containing the relevant bank statements, carefully redacted to protect account numbers, but clear enough to show the pattern of transfers. "Holy shit," she said after a few minutes. "There's more. Marcus took out a life insurance policy on me 6 months ago. A big one. He told me it was for estate planning, but the beneficiary isn't him. It's a trust fund he set up for future children. You think he was planning to? I think Marcus was planning a lot of things. I think Bailey is just practice." Bailey lifted her head from her paws, ears perked, and I realized she could hear Marcus's car in the driveway. He was home. Except this wasn't his home anymore. "Vanessa, I have to go. Marcus just showed up. And I'm betting he's not happy about his evening." "Wait," she said quickly. "What are you going to do now? About the divorce, I mean. About all of this." I watched through the front window as Marcus got out of his car and approached the front door. He still had his tuxedo on from the ceremony, but his bow tie was undone, and his hair was disheveled. He looked like a man whose carefully constructed world had just collapsed around him. "I'm going to make sure he never gets the chance to do this to anyone else," I said. Marcus tried his key in the front door, then tried it again when it didn't work. Through the window, I could see his face change as he realized the locks had been changed. He started pounding on the door. "Stephanie, open the door. We need to talk." Bailey barked once, then looked at me as if asking whether she should be concerned about the noise. "No, girl," I said, scratching behind her ears. "Just someone who doesn't live here anymore." I hung up with Vanessa and called Detective Morrison. "He's violating the restraining order," I told him. "He's at my front door demanding to be let in." "We'll be right there," he said. "Don't open the door. Don't engage with him at all." But Marcus was nothing if not persistent. When pounding didn't work, he started shouting, "I know you're in there. This is my house too. You can't just change the locks." Actually, I could. The house was in my name only, another detail Marcus had overlooked in his exit planning. We'd bought it with my inheritance from my grandmother, and I'd insisted on keeping the deed in my name alone. Marcus had said it didn't matter since we were married, and I'd agreed at the time. Now it mattered quite a bit. "Stephanie, please, I just want to talk. I can explain everything." I opened the laptop again and pulled up the folder containing Marcus's text messages with Brooke. The most recent exchange was from this afternoon, sent while he was getting ready for the awards ceremony. "Can't wait for tonight to be over. Once I get the divorce papers served, I'll be free to start our real life together." The dog thing was genius, by the way. Perfect cover story for why I've been spending so much time away from home. After tonight, Stephanie will be so humiliated she'll agree to anything just to get it over with quickly. I screenshotted the conversation and sent it to my lawyer with a note. Additional evidence of premeditation and emotional abuse. Outside, Marcus had moved from pounding to trying the back door. Bailey followed me to the kitchen window, where we could see him jiggling the handle and peering through the glass. "I'm your husband. You're my soon-to-be ex-husband who committed multiple felonies in an attempt to steal my property. That makes you a criminal, not a spouse." His face twisted with anger. "Property? Bailey is not property. She's a living creature. She needs me." I looked down at Bailey, who was sitting calmly beside me, completely uninterested in Marcus's dramatics. Her tail wagged once when she saw me looking at her. Then she yawned and padded back to her favorite spot on the couch. "Marcus," I said. "Bailey came to me when I called her name tonight. She's sleeping on her favorite cushion right now. She ate her dinner from her regular bowl and checked all her usual spots in the backyard. She's exactly where she wants to be. You poisoned her against me. I didn't have to. Dogs are excellent judges of character." The sound of police sirens was getting closer. Marcus heard them too, and his expression shifted from anger to something that looked like panic. "Stephanie, wait. We can work this out. I made some mistakes, but we can fix this. I love you. I love Bailey. We're a family." The sirens stopped in front of the house. "No, Marcus," I said through the window. "We were never a family. We were a convenient arrangement that you planned to end the moment something better came along. The difference is, I figured out your plan before you could execute it. Detective Morrison appeared in the backyard. My phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa. I left him, took all my stuff while he was at your house trying to break in. Thank you for telling me the truth. I poured another glass of wine and sat down beside Bailey, pulling a soft throw blanket over both of us. Outside, I could hear car doors slamming, voices giving instructions, an engine starting up and driving away. Then, silence. For the first time in months, my house was completely quiet. No lies hanging in the air, no secrets lurking in the corners, no careful pretense to maintain, just me and my dog in our home, exactly where we belonged. I pulled out my phone and sent a text to my sister Kate. Long story short, Marcus was stealing Bailey to impress his pregnant girlfriend, who he was planning to leave for someone else anyway. I filed for divorce, had him arrested for theft and fraud, and got my dog back. The house is mine, the savings account is mine, and Bailey is definitely mine. We'll call tomorrow with details. Her response came immediately. What the actual hell? Followed immediately by, are you okay? And then, do you need me to come over? I looked around my living room. My plants thriving in their corners. My books arranged exactly how I liked them. My grandmother's quilt draped over the chair where I read every morning. Bailey sleeping peacefully beside me, and realized that I was more than okay. I was home. I'm perfect, I texted back. See you tomorrow. I woke up to Bailey's wet nose nudging my hand. Sunlight streamed through the bedroom windows, my bedroom windows, in my house, where I'd slept alone for the first time in 8 years, and somehow gotten the best night's sleep I'd had in months. My phone showed 43 missed calls and 67 text messages. I turned it off without reading any of them. Bailey needed breakfast, and then we needed a walk. Normal things, simple things. Things that had nothing to do with lawyers or police reports or the spectacular implosion of my marriage. The morning air was crisp, with the first hint of autumn cutting through the summer humidity. Bailey trotted beside me with obvious joy, stopping to investigate every interesting smell, marking her territory, reminding the neighborhood that she was back where she belonged. Mrs. Chen from next door was watering her garden when we passed. She waved, then did a double take when she saw Bailey. Oh my goodness, is that Bailey? I thought Marcus said she'd been adopted by another family. Of course he had. Marcus had probably told the entire neighborhood that Bailey had found a better home, that we'd made the difficult decision to give her up for her own good. Another layer to his carefully constructed story. She's back, I said simply. It turns out the adoption fell through. Mrs. Chen smiled. Well, I'm glad. She belongs with you. I always thought it was strange when Marcus said you decided to give her up. You two seem so attached to each other. We are, I said, looking down at Bailey, who was sitting patiently while we talked, her tail wagging slowly. Very attached. We finished our walk and returned home to find Kate's car in the driveway. My sister was sitting on the front porch steps with 2 cups of coffee and a box of donuts from our favorite bakery. I know you said you were fine, she said, standing up to hug me, but I needed to see for myself. Also, I needed to hear this whole story from the beginning because Mom is convinced you've had some kind of nervous breakdown. Kate was 2 years younger than me, but had always acted like the protective older sister. She was a public defender, which meant she had a healthy skepticism about human nature and an excellent understanding of criminal law. Mom thinks I had a nervous breakdown because I divorced my cheating husband. Mom thinks you had a nervous breakdown because you did it publicly, with police involvement, and apparently it involved elaborate fraud schemes and stolen dogs. Kate handed me a coffee. She may have a point about the dramatic flair. I sank onto the porch swing with my coffee, and Bailey immediately jumped up to curl against my side. It wasn't dramatic flair, I said. It was strategic. Marcus was planning to disappear with Bailey and our joint savings, leaving me with nothing but divorce papers and a story about how he'd tried to save our marriage, but I was too unstable to make it work. Kate pulled out her phone and started recording. Okay, start from the beginning and don't leave anything out. So I told her everything. The phone call from the animal shelter, the months of careful investigation, the discovery of Vanessa and then Brooke, and then the life insurance policy, and finally the realization that Marcus wasn't just leaving me. He was systematically dismantling my life to build his new one. Jesus, Kate said when I finished. And I thought my divorce was messy. Your divorce was messy because you found out your husband was gambling away your house. This was different. Marcus wasn't self-destructing. He was planning to commit felonies, apparently. Kate scratched Bailey behind the ears. How did you stay so calm through all of it? If I'd found out about even half of this, I would have burned his car. I thought about that. How had I stayed calm? How had I managed to smile and play the perfect wife while documenting every lie, every theft, every betrayal? I think, I said slowly, it was because I finally understood what I was dealing with. For months, I thought I was going crazy. Little things were off. Marcus was acting strange, but I couldn't put my finger on what was wrong. I started to think maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe I was the problem. And then I realized that my instincts were right. I wasn't going crazy. Marcus was gaslighting me. Once I understood that, everything else became a puzzle to solve instead of a crisis to survive. Kate nodded. Intellectual distance. It's how I handled difficult cases, too. When you can turn it into a problem to solve rather than an emotion to feel, it becomes manageable. Exactly. I sipped my coffee and watched a hawk circle overhead. Plus, I knew that if I reacted emotionally, if I confronted him too early or without evidence, he'd find a way to make me look unstable. He'd already been laying the groundwork for that narrative. What do you mean? I pulled out my phone and showed her some of the text messages I'd saved. Marcus complaining to friends about my mood swings. Marcus telling his mother that I'd been difficult to live with lately. Marcus suggesting to coworkers that the stress of trying to start a family was affecting my mental health. He was setting up a story, I explained. The devoted husband trying to save his marriage to an increasingly unstable wife. When he finally left, everyone would understand. They'd probably feel sorry for him. Kate's expression darkened as she read through the messages. This is emotional abuse, systematic emotional abuse. I know, but it's also really hard to prove without documentation. Good thing I'm good at documentation. My phone started ringing. My lawyer. I should take this. I said, Stephanie, how are you holding up? Came her familiar voice. I'm fine, Patricia. What's the latest? Well, Marcus made bail this morning, but he's been charged with theft, fraud, and violation of a restraining order. His lawyer wants to meet to discuss a plea bargain. I wasn't surprised. Marcus had always been good at finding the quickest route to what he wanted, and right now, what he wanted was to minimize the consequences of his actions. What kind of plea bargain? Full restitution for all financial damages, formal surrender of any claim to Bailey, and agreement to an uncontested divorce with the property division you've proposed. In exchange, you'd agree not to press charges for the fraud and theft. I looked at Bailey, who was watching a squirrel in the oak tree with intense focus, her entire body vibrating with barely contained excitement. And if I don't agree to the plea bargain, then we go to trial, where he'll likely be convicted on all charges and face significant jail time. Plus, Vanessa Rodriguez has agreed to testify about his plans to abandon her after the baby is born, which establishes a pattern of deliberate deception. I thought about Marcus sitting in a jail cell, finally forced to confront the consequences of his actions. There was some satisfaction in that image, but not as much as I'd expected. Patricia, what happens to his real estate license if he's convicted of fraud? He loses it permanently. He'd never be able to work in real estate again. And if he takes the plea bargain, he might be able to keep his license, depending on how the real estate commission handles it. Professional misconduct charges would be separate from criminal charges. I closed my eyes and tried to imagine what Marcus's life would look like either way. Convicted felon with no career prospects, or disgraced ex-husband starting over with a professional reputation barely intact. I'll think about it, I said. There's one more thing, Patricia said. Vanessa Rodriguez called this morning. She wants to meet with you. About what? She didn't say, but she seemed to think it was important. After I hung up, Kate looked at me expectantly. Plea bargain offer, I explained. Marcus wants to avoid jail time. Are you going to take it? I honestly didn't know. 3 months ago, if someone had told me I'd be deciding whether to send my husband to prison, I would have laughed. The idea would have been absurd. Now it felt like just another decision to make. Practical considerations weighed against emotional satisfaction, long-term consequences measured against short-term justice. I said finally, I need to talk to Vanessa first. We met at a coffee shop downtown, neutral territory that felt safe for both of us. Vanessa looked different in daylight, younger, more vulnerable, but also more determined. She was wearing jeans and a sweater that couldn't quite hide her growing bump, and she carried herself with the careful posture of someone learning to navigate pregnancy. Thank you for meeting me, she said, sliding into the booth across from me. I know this whole situation is weird. Weird is one word for it. She smiled, a quick, nervous gesture. I wanted to apologize for my part in all of this. I should have questioned Marcus's story more, should have verified that he was actually divorced before I got involved with him. Vanessa, you were lied to. You don't need to apologize for believing someone you trusted. Maybe, but I also need to tell you something else. She took a deep breath. I'm not just here to apologize. I'm here because I think Marcus is planning something. I felt a familiar chill, the same instinct that had told me something was wrong months ago. What kind of something? Yesterday, after I left him, I went back to get some things I'd forgotten. He was on the phone with someone, and I heard him talking about you. What did he say? He said you'd made a mistake by going public with the divorce. He said you'd humiliated him, and that humiliating him was going to cost you more than you realized. Vanessa leaned forward. He said he still had cards to play. I thought about Marcus's expression when Detective Morrison had arrested him. The anger, yes, but also something calculating. Something that suggested he'd already moved past shock and into planning mode. Did he say what kind of cards? No. But Stephanie, I've been thinking about everything you told me yesterday. About the life insurance policy and the money he's been hiding. What if the plan was never just to leave? What if the plan was to make you disappear entirely? The coffee shop suddenly felt too warm, too loud, too public. I looked around at the other customers, couples sharing pastries, students with laptops, business people grabbing quick meetings, and wondered if any of them were living the same kind of lie I'd been living for months. You think he was planning to kill me? I think he was planning something permanent, and I think Bailey was just the beginning. I pulled out my phone and called Patricia. I need to know something, I said when she answered. The life insurance policy Marcus took out on me, when exactly was it purchased? Give me a second to check the file. It was purchased on March 15th. March 15th, the same day Marcus had told Vanessa he was getting divorced. The same week, he'd started talking about making major changes in his life. Patricia, I'm rejecting the plea bargain, and I think we need to look more carefully at that life insurance policy. What's changed? I looked across the table at Vanessa, who was watching me with the expression of someone who just realized she'd narrowly escaped something terrible. I think Marcus's plan was bigger than we realized, I said, and I think it's not over yet. The revelation that Marcus might have been planning something more permanent than divorce changed everything. What had felt like a straightforward case of adultery and theft suddenly looked like something much darker, much more calculating. Patricia arranged for us to meet with Detective Morrison that afternoon, this time at the police station rather than my living room. The building smelled like industrial coffee and disinfectant, and the fluorescent lights cast everything in harsh, unflattering shadows. Let's start with the timeline, Detective Morrison said, spreading documents across the conference table. March 15th, Marcus purchases a significant life insurance policy on you without discussing it with you first. What else happened around that time? I thought back to March, trying to remember details that had seemed insignificant at the time. He started working out more, I said. Joined a new gym, talked about wanting to get in better shape. He also started talking about us taking a vacation together, somewhere remote. Said he wanted to reconnect away from distractions. Did you take the vacation? No, Every time we tried to plan it, something came up. A work emergency, a family obligation, something. I paused. I thought he was just bad at following through. Now I'm wondering if he was waiting for the life insurance policy to be fully in effect. Detective Morrison made notes. Most life insurance policies have a waiting period for suspicious deaths. Usually 2 years for suicide, 1 year for other circumstances. What was the waiting period on your policy? Patricia flipped through the insurance documents. 6 months, she said, which would have made it fully effective in September. September. We were still 3 weeks away from September. There's something else, Vanessa said. She'd been quiet during most of the meeting, but now she looked directly at Detective Morrison. Marcus has been asking me questions about Stephanie's routines. When she goes grocery shopping, when she takes Bailey for walks, whether she ever goes hiking alone. When did these conversations happen? Over the past month. I thought he was just making conversation, maybe feeling guilty about the divorce, and wanting to make sure she'd be okay on her own. Vanessa's voice got smaller, but looking back, it felt like he was gathering information. Detective Morrison leaned back in his chair. We need to look at this from a different angle. Let's say Marcus was planning something permanent. What would his endgame have been? I thought about the money Marcus had been moving around, the new accounts I'd discovered, the careful way he'd been distancing himself from our shared life. He gets the life insurance payout, I said slowly. Plus my half of the house, my retirement accounts, everything we owned together. Vanessa and the baby provide him with an alibi, the grieving widower trying to start fresh after losing his wife tragically. And then he disappears with Brooke anyway, Vanessa added, leaving me to raise the baby alone while he starts over somewhere else with a new identity and a lot of money. The room fell silent as we all contemplated the scope of what Marcus might have been planning. It was so far beyond ordinary marital betrayal that it felt almost fictional, like something from a crime drama rather than real life. Detective Morrison, Patricia said finally, what do we need to prove this? Because right now, it's all circumstantial. We need evidence of specific planning, documentation, communication with third parties, purchases that would support this theory. He looked at me. Stephanie, I need you to think carefully. Has Marcus done anything recently that seemed out of character? Purchases, conversations, changes in behavior? I closed my eyes and tried to remember. So much of the past few months had been about what Marcus wasn't doing. Not coming home on time, not being affectionate, not including me in his plans. But what had he been doing? He bought camping gear, I said suddenly. Last month. Say he wanted to start hiking more, maybe take some solo trips to clear his head. But Marcus has never been interested in outdoor activities. What kind of camping gear? Everything. Tent, sleeping bags, portable stove, water purification tablets, emergency supplies. Enough for extended trips. I opened my eyes. I thought it was weird, but he said it was part of his new fitness routine. Detective Morrison and Patricia exchanged looks. Where is this gear now? Detective Morrison asked. Probably still in the garage. I didn't pack it when I moved his other belongings. We need to see it. And we need to search Marcus's other properties, his office, his car, anywhere he might have stored additional supplies or documentation. The search warrant was approved within hours. By evening, police were going through Marcus's real estate office, his car, and the camping equipment in my garage. I waited in my living room with Bailey, watching through the windows as investigators carried boxes of evidence to their vehicles. My phone rang. Marcus. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to the message. Stephanie, I know you're angry, and I know I made mistakes, but this has gone far enough. The police are searching my office, my clients are asking questions, and my reputation is being destroyed. We need to talk. There are things you don't understand about our situation. Things that could affect your safety if you keep pushing this investigation. I played the message for Detective Morrison when he came inside to update me on their findings. Is that a threat? I asked. It's borderline, but combined with everything else, it's concerning. He sat down across from me, his expression serious. Stephanie, We found some things in Marcus's office that you need to know about. My stomach dropped. What kind of things? Maps. Detailed topographical maps of remote hiking areas with specific trails marked. GPS coordinates written in the margins. And a folder containing research about hiking accidents, newspaper articles, safety statistics, information about how long it typically takes to find missing hikers. I felt cold despite the warm evening air coming through the open windows. There's more, Detective Morrison continued. We found receipts for cash purchases made over the past 2 months. Rope, emergency flares, a satellite GPS device. All items that could be explained as legitimate camping gear, but also items that could be used to stage an accident. Stage an accident, I repeated numbly. The pattern suggests Marcus was planning to take you on a hiking trip to a remote location. Something would happen during that trip. You'd fall, get lost, have some kind of accident. He'd call for help, play the role of the frantic husband trying to find his missing wife. I looked at Bailey, who was lying peacefully beside me, oblivious to the fact that someone had been planning to murder her favorite human. But it didn't work, I said, because I found out about Bailey first. Exactly. When you discovered his plan to steal Bailey, it forced him to accelerate his timeline. Instead of having months to set up the perfect hiking accident, he had to scramble. That's when he made mistakes. Patricia pulled out her phone. I'm filing for an emergency protective order. Marcus needs to be kept away from you until we can build a complete case. Will that be enough? I asked. Detective Morrison nodded. Based on what we've found today, I'm confident we can arrest Marcus on conspiracy charges. The evidence is circumstantial, but it's extensive and consistent. A jury will be able to connect the dots. What about Vanessa? Is she safe? We're providing protection for her as well. If Marcus was planning to use her as an alibi for your death, she could be in danger once he realizes she's cooperating with our investigation. I spent that night at Kate's house, Bailey curled up on the guest bed beside me. I should have felt safer, knowing that Marcus was being watched and that the police finally understood the scope of what he'd been planning. Instead, I felt hollow. For months, I thought I was dealing with a cheating husband who wanted to steal my dog. The reality was so much worse than anything I'd imagined. How did I not see it? I asked Kate as we sat in her kitchen, sharing a bottle of wine and watching Bailey explore her new temporary territory. Because normal people don't look for signs that their spouse is planning to murder them. Kate said, "You were looking for evidence of an affair, maybe financial infidelity. You found what you were looking for, plus a lot more. But the signs were there. The life insurance, the camping gear, the questions about my routines. The signs were there in hindsight. But Stephanie, even now, with all the evidence laid out, it still sounds crazy. A real estate agent planning to murder his wife for insurance money? It's like something from a bad movie." She was right. If someone had told me 6 months ago that Marcus was capable of planning my death, I would have laughed. Marcus who cried during dog food commercials. Marcus who couldn't kill a spider without feeling guilty about it. But Marcus who could look me in the eye every morning while planning to steal my dog was apparently also Marcus who could research hiking accidents while kissing me goodnight. "Kate," I said, "how do you ever trust anyone again after something like this?" She looked at Bailey, who had settled down with one of Kate's shoes and was methodically destroying it with obvious satisfaction. "I think," she said, "you start with the beings who can't lie to you." My phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa. "Marcus tried to call me tonight. Didn't answer, but he left a voicemail saying he needs to explain everything, that the police have it all wrong. Should I be worried?" I showed the message to Kate. "Yes," she said immediately. "She should be very worried. And so should you." I called Detective Morrison. "We need to bring Marcus in tonight," I said. "He's not going to wait for us to build a perfect case. He's going to run, or he's going to do something desperate." "We're already on it," Detective Morrison said. "Units are heading to his location now." But when they got there, Marcus was gone. His apartment was empty. His car was missing, and according to his neighbor, he'd left in a hurry around dinner time, carrying a large duffel bag. Marcus was running. And somewhere out there, he still thought he could salvage his plan. The manhunt for Marcus lasted 3 days. 3 days of police officers stationed outside Kate's house, of jumping every time my phone rang, of watching Bailey pace restlessly, because she could sense the tension in the air, even if she didn't understand what was causing it. On the second day, they found his car abandoned at a trailhead about 2 hours north of the city. The same trailhead he'd marked on one of the maps in his office. He's trying to disappear into the wilderness, Detective Morrison explained during one of his regular check-ins. But he's not as prepared as he thinks he is. We have search and rescue teams combing the area, and we've alerted all the nearby towns to watch for him. What if he doesn't come back? I asked. What if he just vanishes? Then you're safe, and he spends the rest of his life looking over his shoulder. But I don't think that's what he wants. Marcus planned this whole thing because he wanted the money, the insurance payout, the clean slate. Running away doesn't give him any of that. Detective Morrison was right. On the third day, Marcus called me. "We need to meet," he said without preamble. "There are things you don't understand, and people are going to get hurt if we don't straighten this out." I was at Kate's kitchen table, eating breakfast, while Bailey slept in a patch of sunlight by the window. Kate grabbed her phone to start recording, while I gestured for her to call the police. "Marcus, where are you?" "That doesn't matter. What matters is that you've been lied to. The police, your lawyer, even Vanessa, they're all telling you things that aren't true." "What kind of things?" "I never planned to hurt you, Stephanie. Everything I did was to protect you. The insurance policy, the camping equipment, all of it. I was trying to keep you safe." I almost laughed. Even now, even with all the evidence stacked against him, Marcus was still trying to control the narrative. Safe from what? From the people I owe money to. From the mistakes I made with my business. From the consequences of decisions that had nothing to do with you. Marcus, you stole my dog. You were cheating on me with 2 different women. You forged legal documents. How is any of that protecting me? Because if you'd known the truth, you would have tried to help me, and helping me would have put you in danger. There was something in his voice I'd never heard before. Genuine fear, genuine desperation. For the first time since this whole thing started, Marcus sounded like he was telling at least part of the truth. What kind of danger? The kind where people end up dead if they can't pay what they owe. His voice dropped. "Stephanie, I borrowed money from some very bad people to keep my business afloat. When I couldn't pay it back, they started making threats. Against me, against you, against anyone I cared about. So you decided the solution was to fake my death and disappear with the insurance money? I decided the solution was to make it look like I'd lost everything that mattered to me, so they'd have no reason to hurt you. If you were dead, if we were divorced, if I was just another broke real estate agent starting over, you'd be safe." I looked at Kate, who was listening with the expression she got when dealing with particularly creative criminal defendants. "Marcus," I said carefully, "who did you borrow money from? It doesn't matter now. The point is, by going to the police, by making this whole thing public, you've put yourself back on their radar. They know you exist now. They know you have money, and they're going to see you as a way to get to me. Then come in. Turn yourself in, cooperate with the police, and let them protect both of us. You don't understand. These aren't people who care about police protection. These are people who make problems disappear permanently." The line went quiet for a moment, and I could hear wind in the background, maybe traffic in the distance. "Marcus, where are you calling from?" "I'm close enough to help you if something happens, and far enough away that they can't use me to hurt you. What do you want me to do? I want you to be careful. I want you to pay attention to who's around you, who's asking questions about me, who might be watching your house. And I want you to know that if anything happens to you, it's not because I didn't try to prevent it." Marcus, but he'd already hung up. Kate immediately called Detective Morrison while I sat staring at my phone, trying to process what I'd just heard. "Do you believe him?" Kate asked while we waited for the police to arrive. I believe that he believes it, I said. But Marcus has been lying for so long. I'm not sure he knows the difference between truth and convenient fiction anymore. What if he's telling the truth, though? What if there really are dangerous people looking for him? I thought about that. It would explain some things. Marcus's increasingly frantic behavior over the past few months, his desire to liquidate assets quickly, his willingness to risk everything on such an elaborate scheme. But it would also mean that everything I'd done to expose him had potentially put me in more danger than I'd been in before. Detective Morrison arrived with 2 other officers and immediately began making arrangements for increased security around Kate's house. We're taking this seriously, he told me, but we're also not taking Marcus's word for anything. It's possible he's telling the truth about owing money to dangerous people. It's also possible this is just another manipulation tactic. How can we find out which it is? We're already looking into Marcus's financial records more deeply, checking for any large cash withdrawals or payments to unknown entities. If he really borrowed money from loan sharks or organized crime figures, there should be some trace of it. And in the meantime, you stay vigilant and let us do our job. But vigilance was exhausting. Every car that drove slowly past Kate's house could be a threat. Every stranger who looked at me twice could be watching me. Every phone call from an unknown number could be someone trying to locate me. Bailey sensed my anxiety and stayed close, pressing against my legs when we walked, refusing to leave my side even for her favorite activities. Dogs, I was learning, were excellent judges of when their humans needed protection. On the 4th day, Vanessa called. "Someone broke into my apartment," she said without preamble. "Are you okay? Is the baby okay?" "We're fine. I wasn't home when it happened. But Stephanie, they didn't take anything. They just went through everything, like they were looking for something specific." "Where are you now?" "At a hotel. The police said I shouldn't go back to the apartment until they finish investigating. They think it might be connected to Marcus." I closed my eyes and tried to think. If Marcus was telling the truth about owing money to dangerous people, and if those people were now looking for ways to pressure him, then Vanessa and I were both potential targets. But if Marcus was lying, if this was all part of some larger manipulation, then the break-in could be something he'd arranged himself to make his story more credible. "Vanessa, I need to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully before you answer. When you were with Marcus, did he ever mention owing money to anyone? Ever seem worried about finances beyond normal business concerns?" "Not exactly," she said slowly. "But there were a few times when he got phone calls that made him really tense. He'd step outside to take them, and when he came back, he'd be distracted for hours." "Did you ever hear any part of these conversations?" "Once. He was in the bathroom, and I heard him say something like, 'I need more time,' and 'she doesn't know anything about this.' I thought he was talking about you, about the divorce." "When was this? Maybe 6 weeks ago? Right around the time he started talking about wanting to speed up our timeline for moving in together. 6 weeks ago was when Marcus had surrendered Bailey to the animal shelter. 6 weeks ago was when his plan to steal my dog and leave me had kicked into high gear. Vanessa, I think you should come stay with me and Kate until this gets sorted out. If someone is looking for leverage against Marcus, being pregnant with his child makes you a target. Are you sure? I don't want to put you in more danger." "You're not putting me in danger. We're already in danger. The question is whether we face it together or separately." That evening, Vanessa arrived at Kate's house with a single suitcase and an expression of determined resignation. She looked like someone who'd accepted that her life had become something she never could have imagined, and who was prepared to deal with whatever came next. "Any word on Marcus?" she asked as we settled in Kate's living room. "Nothing since the phone call," I said, "but Detective Morrison thinks he's still in the area. He's too invested in controlling the outcome to just disappear." "What do you think he's planning?" "I think," I said, watching Bailey systematically investigate Vanessa's suitcase, "that Marcus is trying to find a way to be the hero of this story. Even now, even with all the evidence against him, he wants to believe he's protecting me rather than trying to hurt me. But that's insane. Is it? Marcus has spent months constructing elaborate justifications for everything he's done. Cheating on me was about finding happiness. Stealing Bailey was about giving her a better life. Planning my death was about keeping me safe. He's not evil. He's just completely unable to accept responsibility for the pain he causes. Vanessa was quiet for a moment, one hand resting on her stomach. Do you think he would have gone through with it? She asked finally. If you hadn't figured out about Bailey, if his plan had kept working, do you think he would have actually killed you? I'd been asking myself the same question for days. The Marcus I'd married, the Marcus I'd shared a bed with for 8 years, the Marcus who'd cried when we'd had to put my grandmother's cat to sleep. Would that Marcus have been capable of murder? I think, I said carefully, that Marcus would have convinced himself it was the only way to save me from something worse. And once he'd convinced himself of that, he would have been capable of anything. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Look outside. Kate immediately called 911 while I moved to the front window. A figure stood under the streetlight across from the house, too far away to make out clearly, but clearly watching the house. It's him, I said. It's Marcus. The figure raised one hand in what might have been a wave, then turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness between streetlights. Police arrived within minutes, but Marcus was already gone. They found no trace of him in the surrounding blocks, no evidence that he'd been there at all except for my testimony and the cryptic text message. He's escalating, Detective Morrison said. This is psychological pressure, trying to make you feel like he's always watching, always in control. But that wasn't how it felt to me. It felt like Marcus was saying goodbye. The next morning, they found his body. Marcus was discovered by hikers in a ravine about 5 miles from where his car had been abandoned. According to the medical examiner, he'd been dead for approximately 12 hours, which meant he died sometime around midnight, just a few hours after he'd stood outside Kate's house watching us. Initial examination suggests he fell, Detective Morrison told me over the phone. There are injuries consistent with a significant drop, and the location is along one of the trails he'd marked on his maps. Fell or jumped? We're investigating both possibilities. I hung up and looked around Kate's kitchen, where Vanessa was making breakfast while Bailey watched hopefully for dropped food. Normal domestic activities continuing in the wake of devastating news. How do you feel? Kate asked gently. I thought about that. How did I feel about the death of the man I'd been married to for 8 years? The man who'd shared my bed, my dreams, my daily routines. The man who'd also been planning to murder me for insurance money. I feel sad, I said finally. Not about Marcus specifically, but about all of it. About how wrong I was, about who he really was, about how much time I wasted loving someone who never really existed. That's not your fault, isn't it? I lived with him for 8 years. How did I not see any of this coming? Vanessa sat down across from me with her coffee. Because he didn't want you to see it. And because normal people don't go looking for evidence that their spouse is a sociopath. Was he a sociopath? I don't know, but I know he was someone who could look at a pregnant woman and plan to abandon her after using her as an alibi for murder. I know he was someone who could steal a dog from his wife and accept an award for rescuing her. Whatever label you put on that, it's not normal. The funeral was surreal. Marcus's mother flew in from Phoenix. His business partner spoke about his dedication to his clients. And his colleagues from the real estate office shared stories about his sense of humor and his love of animals. Nobody mentioned the fraud charges, the theft, the attempted murder plot, or the 2 women he'd left pregnant and abandoned. It was a sanitized version of Marcus's life, the story he would have wanted people to remember. I sat in the back with Bailey at my feet, wearing the black dress I'd bought for my grandmother's funeral 3 years ago. People kept approaching me with condolences, telling me how sorry they were for my loss, how devoted Marcus had been to me. He talked about you all the time, said his business partner. Always said you were the best thing that ever happened to him. I nodded and smiled and accepted their sympathy, even though every word felt like another small betrayal. These people had known Marcus as a loving husband and dedicated community member. I was the only one who knew the truth about what he'd really been planning. Well, almost the only one. Vanessa had decided not to attend the funeral, but she'd asked me to represent her interests when Marcus's estate was settled. As his widow, I was entitled to his life insurance policy, the same policy he'd taken out planning to collect on my death. There was a certain poetic justice in that. After the service, Marcus's mother approached me. "Stephanie, I wanted to thank you for everything you did for Marcus. I know the last few months were difficult with the divorce proceedings and everything, but I hope you know he loved you very much." I looked at this woman who'd raised the man who'd tried to kill me, and I realized she genuinely had no idea what her son had been planning. The police had kept most of the details out of the media, and Marcus's death had ended the criminal proceedings before they became public. "Mrs. Wellington," I said gently, "there are things about Marcus that you don't know. Things that might change how you remember him." "What kind of things?" I thought about telling her everything. About Vanessa, about Brooke, about the elaborate plan to murder me and steal my dog, about the camping equipment and the hiking mats and the life insurance policy. Instead, I said, Marcus was struggling with some personal issues that he kept hidden from everyone who loved him. I think he was in more pain than any of us realized. It was true in its way. Marcus had been in pain, the pain of someone who'd built his entire life on lies and manipulation, who'd never learned to deal with consequences or accept responsibility for his actions. That kind of life must have been exhausting. I just wish he'd felt like he could talk to us. His mother said, "Maybe if he'd gotten help." Maybe, I agreed, though I doubted therapy could have fixed someone who was fundamentally unable to see other people as real, complex human beings, rather than props in his personal drama. The estate settlement took 3 months. Marcus had been deeper in debt than I'd realized, not just to the mysterious creditors he'd mentioned, but to credit card companies, business loan providers, and several clients whose escrow accounts he'd been using to cover his other expenses. The life insurance policy barely covered his debts, leaving nothing for either Vanessa or his mother. His business partnership dissolved when the extent of his financial misconduct became clear. Even his car was repossessed. In the end, Marcus's grand plan to start fresh with a new identity and a fortune had left everyone who trusted him with nothing but debt and disappointment. But I got Bailey back, and that felt like enough. 6 months after Marcus's death, I finally felt safe enough to move back to my own house. The police investigation had concluded that Marcus had committed suicide, whether from guilt, fear of prosecution, or the realization that his creditors were closing in, we'd never know for sure. Vanessa had moved back to Portland to be closer to her family during the pregnancy. We stayed in touch through text messages and the occasional phone call, bound together by our shared experience of being Marcus's victims and survivors. I had the baby. She texted me one February morning, along with a photo of a perfect little girl with dark hair and serious eyes. "Her name is Grace." I smiled, looking at the picture while Bailey investigated the new dog bed I'd bought her, a replacement for the one Marcus had taken when he'd stolen her from the shelter. "She's beautiful," I texted back. "How are you feeling?" Like I dodged a bullet. She's never going to know her father, but she's also never going to be hurt by him. I think that's a fair trade. I thought about that as I got ready for work. Bailey followed me through my morning routine: coffee, shower, breakfast, the news, with the contentment of a dog who knew exactly where she belonged and who she belonged to. My phone rang as I was gathering my laptop and files for the day. Patricia, my lawyer. "Good morning," she said. "I have some interesting news for you." "What kind of interesting?" "The kind where justice comes in unexpected forms." "Do you remember Brooke? The woman from Portland that Marcus was planning to run away with? The yoga instructor? What about her?" "Well, it turns out she's been doing some investigating of her own since Marcus died. She contacted several other women who'd been involved with Marcus over the past few years, women he'd met through work, through volunteer activities, through online dating sites. I sat down on the couch, Bailey immediately jumping up to curl against my side. How many women? 7 that she's found so far. All of them tell similar stories. Marcus presenting himself as divorced or recently separated, making promises about future relationships, asking detailed questions about their financial situations and daily routines. He was running the same con on multiple people? It looks that way. And here's the really interesting part. 3 of them had unusual accidents or close calls during the time they were involved with Marcus. A hiking fall that could have been fatal if other hikers hadn't been nearby. A car accident caused by what appeared to be brake failure. A food poisoning incident that put someone in the hospital for a week. I felt cold, despite the warm morning sunlight streaming through the windows. You think he was practicing? I think Marcus had been planning this kind of thing for longer than we realized. You weren't his first target. You were just the first one who figured out what he was doing before he could complete his plan. What happens now? Brooke is organizing the other women to file a class action lawsuit against Marcus's estate. It won't recover much money. There isn't much left, but it will create a public record of his pattern of behavior, and it might prevent other people from becoming victims of similar schemes. After I hung up, I sat for a long time thinking about the women who'd come before me. Women who'd trusted Marcus the way I had, who'd been charmed by his attention and his apparent devotion. Women who'd narrowly escaped death without ever realizing how close they'd come. How many others had there been? How many women had Marcus targeted, manipulated, and potentially hurt over the years? How long had he been perfecting his technique? I thought about the Marcus I'd married. Charming, attentive, seemingly devoted to making me happy. Had any of that been real, or had it all been a carefully constructed performance designed to make me the perfect victim? The answer, I realized, didn't actually matter anymore. What mattered was that I'd survived, that Bailey was safe, and that Marcus would never hurt anyone else. My phone buzzed with a text from Kate. Lunch today? I have news. We met at our usual place, a small cafe downtown where the waitresses knew our orders and the atmosphere was comfortable enough for serious conversations. You look good, Kate said, settling into the booth across from me. Healthier than you have in months. I feel healthier. It's amazing what sleeping without a pathological liar in your bed will do for your mental state. Kate laughed. Speaking of mental states, I have something to tell you. I've been seeing someone. That's great. Tell me about him. Her, actually. And before you ask, no, this isn't some kind of post-divorce experiment. I've been thinking about this for a while. But Marcus's whole situation made me realize that life's too short to spend it pretending to be someone you're not. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. I'm happy for you. What's she like? She's a teacher. She has 2 kids from a previous marriage, and she thinks it's completely normal that my sister talks to her dog like she's a human being. Bailey is basically human at this point. She has opinions about everything. Speaking of Bailey, how is she adjusting to being back home? I thought about that morning, watching Bailey methodically patrol our backyard, checking every corner and border to make sure everything was exactly as it should be. She's good. Better than good, actually. It's like she knows the danger is over, and she can finally relax. And how are you adjusting? I'm learning to trust my instincts again. For months, I felt like I was going crazy because things seemed off, but I couldn't prove anything was wrong. Now I know my instincts were right all along. Kate nodded. That's the hardest part of being gaslighted, learning to believe in your own perceptions again. The weird thing is, I'm not angry anymore. I was furious for weeks, planning my revenge, documenting everything, building my case against Marcus. But now that it's over, I just feel empty. Like I spent so much energy on being angry that I forgot how to feel anything else. That's normal. Anger is a survival mechanism. Once you don't need it anymore, it tends to fade. What replaces it? Kate smiled. Whatever you want. That's the beautiful thing about getting your life back. You get to decide what to do with it. That afternoon, I took Bailey to the dog park for the first time since before Marcus had stolen her. She ran with the other dogs, rolled in the grass, and charmed every person who met her with her gentle, friendly demeanor. "She's beautiful," said a woman, sitting on the bench beside me. "What's her story?" I watched Bailey playing with a group of smaller dogs, her tail wagging as she carefully moderated her energy to match theirs. "She's a rescue," I said. "She had a rough few months, but she's home now. Lucky girl. She looks like she knows she's loved." I smiled. She is, very much. On the drive home, with Bailey's head hanging out the passenger window and her ears flapping in the breeze, I made a decision. I was going to sell the house. Our house, Marcus's house, the house where I'd lived a lie for 8 years, and buy something new. Something that belonged only to me and Bailey. Somewhere we could build new memories that had nothing to do with betrayal or manipulation or fear. I was going to start over, the way Marcus had always claimed he wanted to do. But I was going to do it honestly, without hurting anyone, without stealing anything that didn't belong to me. I was going to do it right. The house sold within 2 weeks of being listed. Apparently, a white colonial with blue shutters in a good neighborhood was exactly what several young families had been looking for. None of them asked why I was selling, and I didn't volunteer the information that the previous owner had been planning to commit murder in the backyard. Bailey and I moved into a small cottage on the outskirts of town, when a fenced yard that backed up to a nature preserve and windows that let in light from every direction. It was smaller than the old house, but it felt more spacious somehow. Every room was exactly what I wanted it to be, furnished with things I'd chosen because I liked them, not because they matched some shared vision of what our life was supposed to look like. "It's perfect," Vanessa said, when she came to visit with baby Grace. "It feels like you." I looked around the living room. Mismatched furniture that was comfortable rather than coordinated. Books stacked everywhere. Bailey's toys scattered across the floor. Plants thriving in the sunny corners, and realized she was right. For the first time in years, my home actually reflected who I was rather than who I thought I was supposed to be. "How's motherhood?" I asked, watching Grace sleep peacefully in her carrier, while Bailey sniffed cautiously around the edges, clearly fascinated by this tiny new human. "Exhausting and wonderful," Vanessa said, "and surprisingly healing. I keep looking at her and thinking about how I'm never going to lie to her, never going to manipulate her, never going to make her question her own reality. She's lucky to have you. We're lucky to have each other. And we're lucky to be free of Marcus." It was strange how often our conversations came back to that. The relief of being free from someone we'd both thought we loved. Neither of us missed Marcus exactly, but we both missed the versions of him that we'd believed were real. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd never found out?" Vanessa asked. "If we'd just gone along with his plans? You mean if he'd succeeded in killing me and abandoning you?" When you put it like that, it sounds so melodramatic, but yes. I thought about that while Grace made soft baby noises and Bailey settled down for a nap in her favorite patch of sunlight. "I think," I said finally, "that Marcus would have been miserable. He might have gotten the money and the clean slate he thought he wanted, but he would have had to live with what he'd done to get them. And eventually, he would have started the whole cycle over again with someone new." "You think it was an addiction? The lying and manipulating?" "I think it was the only way he knew how to connect with people. He couldn't just be himself and let people love him. He had to create these elaborate stories and personas. And once you start living like that, it becomes impossible to stop." Vanessa nodded. "Grace is never going to know her father, but she's also never going to learn that love comes with conditions and lies and hidden agendas. That's a gift, I know, the best gift I can give her." After Vanessa left, I took Bailey for a long walk through the nature preserve behind our new house. The trails were well-maintained but not crowded, winding through woods and meadows that felt completely removed from the drama and chaos of the past year. My phone rang as we reached a small pond where Bailey liked to drink and investigate interesting smells. "Detective Morrison, I have an update on the Marcus situation," he said. "We finally tracked down some of the people he owed money to." I sat down on a fallen log while Bailey explored the water's edge, And they were real, but they weren't as dangerous as Marcus made them out to be. Small-time loan sharks mostly. The kind of people who charge ridiculous interest rates and make threatening phone calls, but who rarely resort to actual violence. So Marcus was lying about being in mortal danger? Partially. He did owe them money, quite a bit actually, and they were pressuring him to pay. But the amounts weren't life-threatening, and the consequences would have been financial rather than physical. I watched Bailey wade into the shallow water, tail wagging as she chased something I couldn't see. So he used a relatively minor problem to justify planning murder? It looks that way. Marcus took a manageable situation and escalated it in his mind until it became a crisis that could only be solved by desperate measures. That sounds like Marcus. There's something else. We found evidence that he'd been researching how to disappear completely, new identity documents, offshore bank accounts, countries with favorable extradition laws. The life insurance money wasn't just about paying his debts. It was about funding a complete reinvention. After we hung up, I sat by the pond for a long time, watching Bailey play in the water and thinking about the man I'd been married to. Even now, months after his death, I was still discovering new layers of deception, new evidence of how little I'd really known him. But I was also discovering new things about myself. I was stronger than I'd realized, more resilient, better at reading people and situations than I'd given myself credit for. Marcus had tried to make me doubt my own perceptions, but in the end, my instincts had saved my life. "Come on, girl," I called to Bailey. "Let's go home." She bounded out of the water and shook herself vigorously, sending droplets flying in every direction. Then trotted over to walk beside me as we headed back toward the house. Our house, our home, our life, built on truth instead of lies, on trust instead of manipulation, on love that didn't come with hidden agendas or secret plans. It wasn't the life I'd imagined when I'd married Marcus 8 years ago, but it was better than that imagined life in every way that mattered. It was real. 1 year after Marcus's death, I received an unexpected phone call. A woman named Dr. Elizabeth Harper, a psychology professor who was writing a book about manipulation and domestic abuse. "I've been following your case," she explained, "and I was wondering if you'd be willing to be interviewed for my research. Your experience represents a particularly sophisticated form of psychological abuse, and I think your story could help other people recognize the warning signs." I agreed to meet her at a coffee shop downtown. She was younger than I'd expected, probably in her early 40s, with the kind of intense focus that suggested she cared deeply about her work. "What interests me about your situation," she said after we'd settled into a quiet corner booth, "is how Marcus was able to maintain multiple deceptions simultaneously without any of his victims suspecting the scope of what he was doing. You make it sound like a skill. In a way, it was. Marcus had developed an extremely sophisticated understanding of human psychology. Even if he was using it for destructive purposes, he knew exactly how to present himself to different people to get what he wanted from them. I thought about the Marcus I'd known: attentive husband, devoted animal lover, successful businessman, community volunteer. How many of those personas had been real, and how many had been carefully constructed masks? "Dr. Harper, can I ask you something? Do you think Marcus actually loved any of us? Me, Vanessa, even Brooke?" She considered the question carefully. "I think Marcus loved the idea of being loved. He loved the validation, the sense of control, the feeling of being important in someone's life. But I don't think he was capable of genuine love in the way most people understand it." Because he was a sociopath? Not necessarily. Sociopathy is a clinical diagnosis, and I can't make that determination about someone I never met. But Marcus definitely displayed narcissistic traits, an inflated sense of self-importance, a lack of empathy for others, a willingness to exploit relationships for personal gain. She pulled out a notebook and pen. "Can you tell me about the moment when you first suspected something was wrong?" I thought back to that phone call from the animal shelter. The moment when Amanda had told me that Bailey's microchip was registered in my name. It wasn't dramatic, I said. It was just a small inconsistency in Micah's story. But it was enough to make me start paying attention to other inconsistencies. And what advice would you give to someone who's experiencing those kinds of small inconsistencies in their own relationship? Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, investigate. Don't let anyone convince you that you're being paranoid or overly suspicious. And document everything: dates, conversations, financial transactions, anything that seems off. Dr. Harper took notes while I talked, occasionally asking follow-up questions about specific aspects of Marcus's behavior or my responses to his manipulation. One more question, she said as we prepared to leave. Do you consider yourself a victim or a survivor? I thought about Bailey, who was waiting for me at home, probably napping in her favorite sunny spot by the window. I thought about Vanessa and baby Grace, building a new life together in Portland. I thought about the other women Marcus had targeted, finally able to tell their stories and seek some form of justice. I think, I said, that I was a victim of Marcus's manipulation, but I'm a survivor of my own strength. The victim part was what happened to me. The survivor part is what I did about it. Dr. Harper smiled. That's a good distinction, and it's exactly the kind of insight that will help other people in similar situations. A few months later, she sent me a draft of the chapter about my case. Reading my own story from an academic perspective was surreal, seeing my marriage described in terms of psychological manipulation techniques. My responses analyzed as examples of resilience and problem-solving under stress. But it was also validating. For so long, I'd wondered if I was overreacting, if Marcus's behavior was really as concerning as it had seemed to me. Seeing it laid out in clinical terms confirmed that my instincts had been right, that the danger had been real, and that my response had been both reasonable and effective. The book was published the following spring, and I was invited to speak at several conferences about domestic abuse and financial fraud. It was strange, standing in front of audiences and telling my story, but it was also empowering. Every time I spoke, at least one person would approach me afterward to say that my experience had helped them recognize similar patterns in their own life. I never thought of it as abuse, one woman told me after a presentation in Denver. My husband wasn't hitting me or calling me names, but he was lying about money, making me question my own memory, isolating me from friends and family. Your story helped me realize that manipulation can be just as damaging as physical violence. These conversations were the most meaningful part of my new role as an inadvertent advocate. Marcus had tried to make me doubt my own perceptions, to make me feel crazy and isolated and dependent on him for my sense of reality. Now I was helping other people trust their instincts and reclaim their own stories. Bailey often came with me to speaking engagements, serving as an unofficial therapy dog for audience members who needed comfort after hearing difficult topics discussed. She was particularly good at sensing when someone was upset and offering silent support in the form of a warm, furry presence. She's amazing, said a conference organizer in Seattle. It's like she knows exactly who needs her attention. She's had good teachers in how to recognize when someone is hurting, I said, scratching behind Bailey's ears. We've both learned to pay attention to things that other people might miss. 2 years after Marcus's death, I started dating again. It felt strange at first, learning to trust my judgment about men, learning to distinguish between genuine interest and manipulation, learning to recognize red flags without becoming paranoid about every small inconsistency. His name was Thomas, and he was a veterinarian who treated Bailey when she needed her annual checkup. He was quiet and straightforward, the kind of person who said exactly what he meant and meant exactly what he said. After years of dealing with Marcus's elaborate deceptions, Thomas's honesty was like fresh air. I like him, Vanessa said during one of our regular video calls. Grace was now a toddler, babbling happily in the background while Vanessa folded laundry. He seems uncomplicated. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Definitely good. Complicated men are overrated. Thomas and I took things slowly. We had coffee dates, walks in the park, quiet dinners where we talked about our work and our families and our hopes for the future. He knew about Marcus. It was hard to date someone in a small town without the story coming up, but he didn't treat me like a victim or a curiosity. He treated me like a woman he was interested in getting to know better. "Can I ask you something?" he said one evening as we sat on my back porch, watching Bailey chase fireflies in the yard. "Do you ever worry that what happened with Marcus will make it hard for you to trust anyone again?" I considered the question while Bailey stalked a particularly elusive firefly with intense concentration. "I think what happened with Marcus taught me the difference between trusting someone and trusting myself," I said. "I used to think that love meant giving someone the benefit of the doubt, even when my instincts were telling me something was wrong. Now I know that real love doesn't require me to ignore my own perceptions." "And what do your instincts tell you about me?" I looked at him, really looked at him, taking in his honest face, his patient demeanor, the way he'd been quietly earning Bailey's trust over the past several months. "They tell me that you're exactly who you appear to be, and that's exactly who I want to be with." Thomas smiled and reached for my hand. "Good, because I was hoping you'd feel that way." We were married the following spring, in a small ceremony in my backyard with Bailey as the unofficial maid of honor. Vanessa flew in from Portland with Grace, who is now old enough to scatter flower petals with great enthusiasm and questionable accuracy. "It's perfect," Kate said, adjusting the simple wildflower crown I'd chosen instead of a veil. "You look happy. Really, genuinely happy." I looked at myself in the mirror. White cotton dress, minimal makeup, hair loose around my shoulders, and realized she was right. I looked like someone who was exactly where she wanted to be, with exactly the person she wanted to be with. The ceremony was officiated by Detective Morrison, who'd gotten ordained online specifically for the occasion. It seemed fitting that the man who'd helped me escape Marcus's web of lies would be the one to witness me promise to build a life based on truth and trust. "Do you, Stephanie, take Thomas to be your husband, promising to love him honestly, support him faithfully, and build a life together based on mutual respect and genuine affection?" "I do," I said, and meant every word. "Do you, Thomas, take Stephanie to be your wife, promising to love her for exactly who she is, support her dreams and ambitions, and never ask her to be anyone other than herself?" "I do," Thomas said, squeezing my hands gently. "Then by the power vested in me by the state and the internet, I pronounce you husband and wife." The reception was held in the same backyard, with string lights and homemade food and toasts that were heartfelt, rather than performative. It was everything my first wedding hadn't been: small, intimate, genuine, focused on celebrating love rather than impressing guests. "Speech," someone called out as the evening wound down. I stood up, holding Thomas's hand, and looked around at the faces of the people who'd supported me through the darkest period of my life. 3 years ago, I said, I thought I knew what love looked like. I thought it was grand gestures and dramatic declarations and the willingness to overlook problems for the sake of keeping the peace. Bailey wandered over and sat at my feet, looking up at me with the patient expression she wore when she wanted me to get to the point. "But real love," I continued, "is much simpler than that. It's honesty, even when honesty is uncomfortable. It's trust that doesn't require blind faith. It's choosing each other every day, not because you have to, but because you want to." I looked at Thomas, who was listening with the same focused attention he gave to everything important in his life. "Marcus taught me what love isn't. Thomas is teaching me what love is. And Bailey," I reached down to scratch behind her ears. "Bailey taught me that sometimes the most important love is the love you have for yourself." The applause was gentle and warm, and as it died down, I realized that this was what happiness felt like. Not the desperate, grasping emotion I'd mistaken for love during my marriage to Marcus, but something steady and peaceful and real. "One more thing," I said as people began to gather their things and prepare to leave. "If anyone here ever finds themselves in a situation where something feels wrong, but they can't quite put their finger on what it is, trust that feeling. Your instincts are there for a reason. Listen to them. Several people nodded, and I saw a few meaningful looks exchanged between couples. Maybe my story would help someone else avoid the trap I'd fallen into. Maybe Marcus's legacy could include preventing other people from becoming victims of similar manipulation. That night, as Thomas and I cleaned up the remnants of our celebration with Bailey supervising from her favorite spot on the porch, I felt truly at peace for the first time in years. "No regrets?" Thomas asked, carrying a stack of plates into the kitchen. "About what?" "Any of it. Marcus, the public divorce, the whole dramatic revelation. Would you do anything differently if you could?" I thought about that while I packed away the leftover cake and folded the tablecloth my grandmother had made for special occasions. "I would have trusted my instincts sooner," I said finally. "I would have called the animal shelter the first time Marcus told me Bailey had been adopted by another family, instead of waiting for them to call me. But then you might not have discovered the full scope of what Marcus was planning. You might have just caught him cheating instead of catching him before he could hurt you. He was right. If I'd confronted Marcus earlier, I might have saved myself some emotional pain, but I also might not have gathered enough evidence to protect myself legally. And I definitely wouldn't have been able to warn Vanessa about what she was really dealing with. Then no, I said, I wouldn't change anything. Even the painful parts led me to where I am now. And where is that? I looked around my kitchen. Our kitchen, with its mismatched dishes and herb plants on the windowsill, and Bailey's food bowls in the corner. Then I looked at Thomas, who was loading the dishwasher with the same careful attention he brought to everything in his life. "Home," I said. "For the first time in years, I'm really home." 5 years had passed since the night Bailey was stolen, and my life had settled into a rhythm that felt both peaceful and purposeful. Thomas and I had expanded our family to include 2 cats, rescues from his veterinary practice, and a small garden where I grew vegetables and flowers with the same careful attention I'd once devoted to tracking Marcus's lies. I still worked as a forensic accountant, but I'd started specializing in cases involving financial abuse and fraud in domestic relationships. It was satisfying work, helping people untangle the financial webs that manipulative partners had woven around them, giving them the documentation they needed to reclaim their independence. "Another successful case," my colleague Maria said, reviewing the report I'd just completed. "This one should be straightforward. The husband was moving money systematically, but he wasn't very sophisticated about hiding it. They rarely are," I said. "Most people who commit financial abuse aren't criminal masterminds. They're just selfish individuals who think they're smarter than everyone else. Speaking of which, have you seen this?" Maria handed me a newspaper article. "Remember Marcus Wellington? Apparently there's been a development." I took the article with some trepidation. Even 5 years later, unexpected news about Marcus could still trigger a spike of anxiety. The headline read, "Local man's death linked to multi-state fraud ring." I scanned the article quickly. Federal investigators had uncovered evidence that Marcus had been part of a larger network of individuals who targeted wealthy women for romance scams and insurance fraud. The investigation had been ongoing for 3 years, and Marcus's death had initially been treated as an isolated case. But new evidence suggested that Marcus's activities had been coordinated with others, and that his death might not have been a suicide after all. "They think he was murdered?" I asked Maria. "It looks that way. Apparently, one of his partners in the fraud ring was arrested last month, and he's been cooperating with authorities. He claims Marcus was planning to expose the whole operation to avoid prosecution." I felt a strange mixture of vindication and sadness. Vindication because it confirmed that Marcus's criminal behavior had been even more extensive than we'd realized. Sadness because it meant his death had been violent rather than a moment of guilt or despair. "Are you okay?" Maria asked, studying my face with concern. "I think so. It's just, even now, I'm still learning new things about who Marcus really was. It makes me wonder if I ever knew him at all. From what you've told me, I don't think anyone knew the real Marcus. I think he was so busy being different people to different victims that he lost track of who he actually was underneath all the personas." That evening, I shared the news with Thomas while we prepared dinner together. He listened without judgment, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but mostly just letting me process the information out loud. "Does this change anything for you?" he asked as we sat down to eat. "I don't think so. Marcus was planning to kill me, whether he was working alone or with partners. The fact that someone else killed him first doesn't make his intentions any less real. But it might explain some things. The mysterious creditors he claimed to be afraid of. The pressure he was under toward the end." I nodded. It also explains why he was so confident about his plan. If he'd done this before, with other women, he would have known exactly how to manipulate the situation. "Do you think the police will want to interview you again?" "Probably. I don't have any information that would be helpful. I never met any of Marcus's associates, never saw evidence of a larger operation. To me, he was just a lying, cheating husband who was planning to murder me and steal my dog." Thomas smiled at that. "Just your average domestic drama." "Exactly. Nothing unusual about it at all." After dinner, I called Vanessa to let her know about the article. Grace, now 5 years old, answered the phone with the confidence of a child who'd been taught that phone calls were usually good news. "Hi, Aunt Stephanie. Mommy's making cookies. Do you want to talk to her?" "I'd love to, sweetheart." Vanessa came on the line, and I could hear Grace chattering to someone else in the background, probably her grandmother, who'd moved to Portland to help with childcare. "I saw the article," Vanessa said immediately. "How are you feeling about it?" "Confused. Mostly. It's hard to reconcile the Marcus I lived with for 8 years with someone who was apparently a professional con artist. Maybe that's because the Marcus you lived with was just one of his characters. Maybe none of us ever met the real person. That's what's so unsettling. If he wasn't real with any of us,